Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And I'm very, very happy to have as my guest today Carol Murchison. Carol is a dynamo, to say the least. Carol, you and I have met several times in different
Yes.
places at cult conferences, and um, I just love your energy, your passion, and your desire to make the law work for victims of undue influence, particularly sexual violence and psychological coercion. You're a former partner at Morgan Lewis in Philadelphia, where you were an employment lawyer investigating issues of sexual misconduct in the workplace. Look, you're currently the head of a practice group at the law firm of McAllister Olivarius that represents survivors of sexual misconduct in cults and spiritual communities. And with that, Carol, all I can say is we need you. We need more lawyers to understand brainwashing, mind control, undue influence, the forces that go into the silencing of people who have had a terrible experience. And so I want to pick your brain and I want you to share your backstory to start. I remember when we first met, you said, I was retired. And then I came out of retirement because I realized there was a lot more work I wanted to do. So take it away.
So take it from there. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Steve. Yes, I was an employment lawyer. I did investigations in the workplace. And then I retired. My family jokes that I had the shortest retirement on record because I went back to work then doing investigations just as an independent contractor where
Mm-hmm.
I had been. Where I had been a partner. And that was good until about 2018 when I just through a series of coincidences, volunteered to do an investigation into sexual assaults in a Buddhist community in Canada, a
Mm-hmm.
very large community. And I have to say that I didn't really, my impression of Buddhists was that this must be not true, or
Mm.
there was some misunderstanding. But the reality was I did an investigation and I did find that it was true. And that particular situation got some press. And then a whole lot of women started coming forward and saying, wow, this happened to me in my spiritual community. I didn't even have a name for it. I didn't know that it had ever happened to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I began a kind of 4-year pro bono project of investigating. And what I found at the end of it was that none of these communities wanted to be held responsible or to take accountability for what had happened, and that I needed what I think of as the hard hammer of the law, as a kind of last resort. And
Mm-hmm.
so I met Anne Olivarius. She has long been a fighter for women and for issues of gender violence and discrimination. And so she found a place for me in the law firm, heading up a group where we only do sexual assault, excuse me, and spiritual. And what I found out is that a lot of them are cults, Steve. Or
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they are cults, but they have a lot of the indicators of cults, which
Right.
I didn't know when I started out.
Right. So for me, I believe that cults exist along the entire influence continuum from
Mm-hmm.
ethical to unethical. And of course,
Yes.
my work is with authoritarian mind control
Mm.
cults that use deceptive recruitment
Mm-hmm.
and control of behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make people dependent and obedient. So for me, whenever there's an individual or a structure within an institution that's hierarchical, where you are supposed to just blindly obey the person at the top, there's a tremendous ability to abuse people, not just sexually, but psychologically, doing labor trafficking, for example, as well as
Yes.
abusing them sexually. So, and Jewish cults, Christian cults, Islamic cults, Buddhist cults, Hindu cults, atheist cults,
Yes.
corporations, large group awareness trainings. Like you go on and on in
Yes.
the categories, but they all share the same wanting to control behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, and treating human beings as if they're objects or pawns for the greater good
Mm-hmm.
of the leader, and to make money, and to,
Yes.
do sexual aggrandizement.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, I'm thinking about my kind of list of cases, and I would say that the authoritarian control is probably the number one factor in all of them,
Yeah,
where you have to obey, where there's this person at the top. It's so interesting that it's the authority that they have. It's not enough in a way to even say authority. It's that they have all encompassing authority,
right,
who you will be with, who you will be friends with, what you think, what you wear, what you eat, how much you weigh. I
right.
mean, it's a need on the part of the leader to have complete control over people. And that's for in my work, in the legal work, I think that's what we see in every single one of our cases, is where there cannot be consent
Mm-hmm.
because there's too much coercion.
Yeah, talk to us some more
Yeah,
about that from your expertise. Let's flesh that out, because I'm sure there'll be some listeners going, wait a minute, that sounds like what happened to me.
it could well be, because I think that for a lot of the survivors that I work with, they they begin by thinking that maybe they consented. They didn't want to,
Right.
but the coercion meant, as one of my clients said once, and it just really stuck in my head, I knew that she was going to be asked, why didn't you leave? You weren't locked in. All of these questions that the opposing counsel are going to ask in depositions and at trial. And so I was trying out asking her these questions so
Sure.
she would be prepared. And she said, it was more dangerous on so many levels to say no. It was, it just, you couldn't. And the danger wasn't just physical, although in her case, it was also some physical punishment
Mm-hmm.
for refusing to do, sexual acts with the leader. It was also dangerous because you would have to leave the community. You would lose all your friends.
Right.
You would have, where would you go? All of these things are losses,
Right.
and they're and so therefore refusing to do these things is dangerous. Now, what we know, and everyone I know listening knows this, when we talk about rape, if we talk about someone who is raped in a dark alley with a gun to their head, we don't ask them if they fought back,
Right.
if they could get away, because we understand the danger.
Right.
But I think that what I have found in the cases that I have is that that danger, that same concept, needs to extend further under
Yes.
the law, right?
Y-
We need to understand that the danger is not only physical, that there are psychological dangers, there are all emotional dangers, there are all kinds of ways in which coercion negates consent. And
Yep.
that's where we need the law to go.
Yep.
We need to have a better understanding of consent, not just for this particular area,
Mm-hmm.
but also for many, many, many cases of sexual violence.
Yep.
Consent is too narrow right now.
Yep. So let me add a few thoughts
Yes.
to this discussion. So a lot of the people I've worked with as clients over the decades were indoctrinated to believe that the guru or the messiah or the prophet of God had magical, mystical powers.
Yes.
They could read minds, they could astrally project,
Yes.
they could control your destiny in the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual realms. And so the rationality of looking at a guru
Mm.
in the same with the same eyes as you would, a store clerk, or
Right.
or even a psychologist. A psychologist can also say, "Well, I'm the only one who can help you, and you're going to
Mm-hmm.
need to be in therapy with me for 20 years." I recently talked with a woman who was being programmed with false memories of sexual abuse, and this therapist, credentialed therapist, was telling her
Yes.
that she's going to need to be in treatment for 20 years. And, but in any case, so that's one dimension where the mind has been hacked out
Yes.
of a realm of rational
Mm-hmm.
evaluation of, is there actual danger here or not? But as you say correctly, there's the fear of ostracism. You might be kicked out or you may be shunned. But there's also a fear of harassment and threats. Often
Absolutely.
these people make up stories, ad hominem attacks, to
Yes.
preemptively neutralize you as a credible victim, to say, you abused me and such.
Yes.
So please
I,
say more.
Yes, well, so definitely I see that. I see all of that. It's interesting. You said before it could be, it could be Christian, it could be Jewish, it could be Hindu, yoga, Buddhist. And it's true that there's almost no content that makes any difference in
Mm,
terms of, doctrine.
mm,
Um, it is about control, and it is about I see again in almost all of my cases that the person is embodied a magical quality,
right.
and the thing that I hear from people who've not had this experience or lived with it is, well, that would never happen to me,
Yes,
right?
I've heard that in the
Yes,
last 48 years that I've been
yes.
sharing my story.
Exactly, right? Because you've had this experience. But the reality is that, of course, it could happen to any of us. We all have certain beliefs. We're all susceptible to the same kind of coercion and manipulation that any of these cults are doing. It's simply that some people come in wounded, looking for
Sure.
solace. I think now that people come in because the world is such an ambiguous place,
Mm.
and that someone who has all the answers feels like a comfort. I'm sure, like me, you have days in which you wish that someone would just come in and say, Carol, here are all the answers that you need to know.
Yeah, I've
And
given that one up a long time ago because I'd rather guess and be
yes,
wrong, but have it my own choice than to look to
right.
someone else to tell me what reality is. That said, I respect experts in different fields, but I want to
Yes,
hear their reasoning and their
yes.
basis for reasoning things.
But you've had that experience, Steve. You know what it is to give up your autonomy and then have to fight to get it back.
Yeah.
And I think until, for a lot of people, they don't see that. One of my clients who was quite young, like 18 when she went into a cult, and others that were born into cults,
Right.
have said that they felt that they were very vulnerable to this kind of thing because they were so young that they didn't even know what it was to have adult autonomy.
Right.
And so when they took it away from them, they
Right.
didn't even realize it was gone.
Right. They didn't know what was normal or
Right.
healthy or what
Right.
human rights are supposed to be about.
Yes.
So I'm going to take a minute, if I may, Carol, and just
Yes.
use my own personal experience for a minute to flesh out some other concepts around consent and informed consent. So I was vulnerable as a 19-year-old college student at Queens College. My girlfriend abruptly dumped me, and I was sitting in the cafeteria waiting for the spring semester, and three women carrying books as students who asked to sit at my table lied to me, said they were students. I remember even asking them, are you part of some religious group? Oh, no, not at all. We're part of a student movement to make the world a better place. And all I thought was I might get lucky with one of the three of them. I had no interest in becoming a Moonie. And if they had said honestly, yup, we bowed to an altar with a picture of a Korean guy who we think is the Messiah, I would have told him to take a hike, right? But the deception kept going and the manipulation. And what I didn't understand was that anything I was sharing about myself was being funneled to the leadership to construct a strategy for how to get inside my head.
Yes.
And I became an expert recruiter because I understood the formula. Of course, I was programmed to believe I was going to help people spiritually and help save 10 generations of their ancestors who were stuck at low levels of the spirit world, things I didn't believe in before the programming. But I had this weight of conscience that all of my deceased relatives were suffering in the spiritual realm, right? As I'm getting deeper and deeper into this mind control cult. And where I'm going with this is this was 1974, 5, 6, and the methods have now supercharged with the internet, with data collection on people to the point where you can buy information on people's profiles on the dark web and know what kind of food they like, know if their parents divorced, know the type of dog they have or their favorite food or what car. And these profiles are now available for purchase. And what I've seen, some demonstrations, people who wanted to like warn people, they would walk up to people, they would track them on Facebook and whatever, and they'd walk up to them and go, I had a dream about you last night. I saw you with a Labrador retriever named Lucky. How did you know that?
Yes.
Oh, I have a gift. And they do this. And then eventually they say, after they're being recorded, they say, I got this all information on the internet. Like, don't believe psychics who show up and tell you this. But what I'm trying to convey is the law needs to catch up with the methodologies that are now being used to co-opt our consent.
Yes.
And not just sexually, but everything else, giving up our property, giving up our education, divorcing, all kinds of things to harm human beings. Please say more.
The law has a lot of catching up to do. So I have found this in the last 2 years that I have been down in this litigation trench and, in ways that I have not, of course, really understood before. Right. But for example, the coercion that you are talking about, and I think that control and coercion, these kinds of things are really a place where the law needs to get, as you said, needs to catch up and get there. The thing is also that for example, we only take clients who've had some kind of sexual violence against them in cults. It's not because that's the only kind of coercion that exists.
I
It's
see.
the only kind of coercion that the law recognizes.
Interesting.
So think about that. I have people who come to me and they say, financial. Let's take financial. That's a big one, right? I mean,
Sure.
it's follow the money here. And so if I can get a lot of people to pay me regularly, I mean, we saw this in Keith Raniere, right? And if we saw The Vow on television, it was about money. It was a multi-level marketing scheme. So in some
Exactly.
way or another, this is about money. So I have somebody who comes to me and says, I need your help because I'm not a wealthy person, but I've given $25,000-$30,000 over the last 5 years to this person, and I've just realized that it's a cult.
Right.
There's nothing that I can do
Right.
because the law does not recognize that money may not have been given freely.
Right.
You wrote the check, you didn't need to write it, and so there is no recognition of the coercive control or the coercion there. The same thing emotionally. When people have given up, as you said, their education, who they marry, whether or not to have children, in both directions.
Right.
Some that insist that you have children, others that insist that you don't. Whatever it is, the emotional and the psychological kind of coercion, the law does not have a response for. And so it's interesting to me, and I don't know what the answer to this is, Steve, but it is interesting that where we've put the line in the sand on coercion happens to be with sex. So there's something in there culturally that means that that's where we are. We do have some remedies there.
Right. But
we don't for the others.
I want to go further. Obviously, I did my doctoral dissertation because I believe it's not a slippery slope, that we can use methods, scientific, valid methods to explore someone's vulnerabilities and how they were told lies so that they weren't choosing, or that the cult was using psychic readings and past live readings and other things to coerce people into believing. And a lot of my clients never believed in reincarnation until they got indoctrinated in the cult. Please.
You know what? It just comes to me as part of the problem in the United States with the law is a small thing called the First Amendment. Okay, so many of the things that you're talking about, we have difficulties because we don't want to run into the First Amendment, which is the freedom to believe in the religion of your choice. I mean, and that's easy, right? Because if you said to people, should we have that freedom? They would say yes. However, the end result of that, when you get to a legal system, is that if I am lied to, like many of my clients, most of my clients have been lied to in some way or another, all in the name of religion.
Right.
So if my client says, I was told that this was a spiritual practice and that I would attain enlightenment if I did this, we cannot go for the lies. Because a judge will say, more likely than not, well, I can't get into whether that's a lie. It would require the judge to say, well, maybe this person would have become enlightened if they had continued on this path, right? That's the crazy logic of it.
Yeah.
So they don't want to get entangled with religion. It's a very broad kind of it's a very broad freedom that's been granted. And the way that we deal with it is not on fraud. In my mind, telling somebody that if you have sex with me, you will become enlightened is a lie. It's deception and it's fraud.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the law's eyes, it's like, well, I can't tell whether that was enlightenment or not. And so we use coercion
Yeah.
as a way of working through the legal system on these claims.
Right. So Marcy Hamilton, who's a UPenn law professor and CEO of ChildUSA.org, has been a champion on this topic. She wrote God versus the Gavel
Yes.
and such, and she and I go back decades. But I guess you can say I'm an idealist because I believe to do justice, which is what the law should be about, we can define healthy religions that deserve our tax exempt status as a society, um, and give those that tax exempt and these other benefits to groups that don't systematically defraud people and enslave people and cut them off from their conscience or tell them they can't talk to ex-members or read negative articles.
Yeah.
Say some more.
I agree. No, I agree completely. I agree completely. And I think that in my we've worked with Marcy. She's helped us enormously on this topic. And so we really owe her a great debt of gratitude because all of our cases have the potential of this First Amendment obstruction in a way. I agree with you. I personally agree that we should not be giving a tax benefit to people who are breaking the law.
Right.
I mean, if you
enslaving
said that,
people and trafficking people.
Right. Exactly. If you ask the kind of the person on the street, should we be giving a tax benefit to people who are breaking the law? I think almost everyone would agree that you should not. And yet, as far as I can tell, we don't have any standard for the 501c3 or the religious tax exemption. Other than that, they don't become a commercial enterprise. And so one of the ways that I think we could, crack down on some of these groups is, they got Al Capone for tax evasion. I mean, maybe we should be lobbying for stronger kinds of controls over the tax exemption itself.
Yeah, well, that's how they got Keith Raniere and NXIVM, was that it wasn't a religion. It was a coaching cult.
Right. Exactly. And he agreed that it wasn't a religion. And I think that they would have gotten him anyway, because again, in the Raniere case, they used a particular law that we have used a number of times, which is called the Federal Human Trafficking Act. And it's always a surprise to people because trafficking sounds like moving people. And in fact, in the Raniere case, as I understand it, at least, he did move someone from Mexico to the United States. But the Trafficking Act does not require that we move people.
Right.
It requires only that there be some nexus with the Interstate Commerce Act, which anybody who has a cell phone is already engaged in interstate commerce. I mean, it's just that simple.
That's really interesting.
And so what the Trafficking Act does, and what I think acts as a kind of way of thinking about the things that you're talking about, which is not getting pigeonholed in these areas, in fact, is that the Trafficking Act recognizes that people can be enticed, they can be recruited. So when I hear those two words, I'm thinking cults right away, right? Enticed and recruited knowingly for what the legal words are a commercial sex act. But a commercial sex act is not prostitution. It's not money for sex. It's sex for anything of value. And so and it's by fraud or coercion. So entice, recruit for commercial sex using fraud or coercion. That really, when we have to take out the fraud on the First Amendment part of it, but the coercion says, and consent is not an issue. So consent is not a defense because it's not a part of the law. The only question is coercion. And the way to think about this is Harvey Weinstein.
Mm.
Harvey Weinstein was one of the claims against him was under the Trafficking Act. And what they said is Harvey Weinstein enticed or recruited young actresses to have sex with him, and he would give them
Parts.
Yes,
roles.
He would introduce them to producers, whatever. Right. That was coercion.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the Trafficking Act. So if you think about Harvey Weinstein and then you think about some of the groups that you and I are aware of that exist out there, the Trafficking Act fits very well. To make it even better, there's a part of it that says if you're the beneficiary of this, as an organization, for example, you are liable also.
Yeah. And that's why I did my dissertation based on the trafficking laws, saying we have this.
Yes.
The bite model actually includes fraud and psychological threats as well, and it's used by labor trafficking experts and sex trafficking experts to explain coercion.
Yes.
So I'm very happy that we have somewhere to establish a framework.
Exactly.
But I want to come back to another element that I think the law is so out of date on, and I cite my now esteemed and deceased colleague Alan Shefflin, who was a law professor at Santa Clara University emeritus and just an expert on hypnosis and did research on MK Ultra and dissociation. Shefflin created a social influence model for expert witnesses to explain to judges and juries to evaluate the relationship between the predator and prey, if you will, and such. But I want to come back to Raniere because Salzman and Raniere were using hypnosis. They were using neuro-linguistic programming. And I've interviewed more than a few people, women in particular, who would have 3-hour meetings with Raniere and come out not remembering a single thing of what happened to them. And I know, as someone who's studied hypnosis, you can program someone to have amnesia to what happened to them. I did a blog with a divorce attorney who was teaching his female clients he was attracted to a relaxation technique and then sexually abusing them. He's in jail. But it was only because of a savvy client of his, an attorney herself, who said, no, I remember putting on my panties the right way, and there's this wet stain, and I don't know what happens, but there's something wrong. And she recorded the next meeting, and that led to a sting. This guy was named Fine. So, and Shefflin wrote a book called Trance on Trial. And he raised the weirdness that the law says if your memory has been hypnotically refreshed, it can't be used for testimony. So on the one hand, it's acknowledging hypnosis as a powerful force.
That it would have an effect, right?
Right. But on the other hand, we can't talk about the fact that people are being hypnotized without their consent, thinking they're doing a meditation or guided relaxation exercise, and they may not even remember what happened to them.
Yes, exactly. Oh, and you're right. I mean, if you think about it, I think you said earlier that the law has some catching up to do, and I think that what I think is that what we know about the brain, what I call brain science, I'm sure they call it
neuroscience.
Yes, right. What we know is like expanding exponentially practically every day what we know.
Right.
We know that, for example, many, many practices actually lead to dissociation
Right.
of people's minds and their bodies.
Yep.
And yet we don't have that. It doesn't have any kind of stamp of approval on it to be used at trial, which is where we need to be able to use these things.
Right.
I think, for example, when I'm at the ICSA conference where you and I met, Steve, that I'm always so appreciative of the people and the kind of disciplines that they're working in, because those of us who are in the litigation trench really need the psychologists. We need media. I can't tell you how the media has been so helpful in helping the public understand cult behavior and coercion. We need academics who are doing research. We need neurologists who are doing research on the brain and what you're talking about, because we have so few tools in that trench that we need to be reaching up all the time and getting something from studies, from experts, from psychologists, and all of it. All comes down, of course, I'm a lawyer, so I think this way. It all comes down to help lawyers move the law along, as slowly as it is.
And I'll say that through my involvement with the forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School called the Program in Psychiatry and the Law, they basically said, Steve, the law doesn't like qualitative studies. They want quantitative studies. And that's why I did my dissertation doing a quantitative study on the bite model to show that it had, high factor analysis for authoritarian control. But basically what they've said is the law changes with precedent-setting cases or a preponderance from the scientific community based on research and published journal articles. The reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a lot of young people in their careers wanting to make a difference, whether they're psychologists, whether they're in law school or they're earlier on. And here's a real area that we need more legal journal articles written. We need more psychology research, more neuroscience research, exploring these topics so that we can create a scientific framework that makes sense. We're not going to violate people's freedom of religion if they want to believe that there are space aliens going to come down on a mountain. Okay. But if you're in the Jehovah's Witnesses and you're going door to door saying we want to study the Bible with you, and you knowingly are using the New World Translation, which is published by your organization, but no Christian or Jewish scholar thinks that it has any substance or any credibility in scholarship. To me, the Jehovah's Witnesses should not be tax exempt if they're systematically defrauding the public by saying we're going to study the Bible with you. To me, that's a case that needs to be adjudicated, in my opinion.
Well, it's like if I can think back to the beginning of truth in advertising.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what you're really talking about.
Yep.
You're talking about people being forced to have a truth that is outside of, like we maybe don't know the truth of enlightenment. My own personal thing is I do not even like the word enlightenment, given how badly it has been misused among my clients.
Right.
But the reality is there is a truth. This either is the translation or it isn't. Do you know what I mean? We can come to that understanding because we do it all the time on products that might be dangerous. And so these are nothing more than that.
Right. And I say that if people are asking for tax exempt status, they
Mm-hmm.
should be able to write up a statement of beliefs and
Mm-hmm.
practices for their community that people are given before they're asked to convert,
Yes.
before they're asked to do a 40-day, meditation retreat or whatever, where they can know upfront in paperwork and where they're encouraged to show this to an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
you
Yes.
know let's talk about how so many cults have people signing NDAs and
Mm.
labor trafficking documents saying, I will be a
I will never.
nun and I'll work for nothing
Yeah.
forever and have no
Yes.
health benefits.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
Well, I mean, whether an NDA is enforceable or not is a question that's a kind of in flux right now, right?
Mm,
Because we've shown a light on the fact that in a lot of circumstances, an NDA does nothing but protect the people who have, should have gone to jail but didn't,
right.
by silencing people. And so we have a lot of movement now toward, I mean, California has a new law I think it's called Silence No More. It addresses the issue of NDAs. New York has a law that's, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that it really is like a right of rescission law. It says if you sign a settlement agreement and you don't realize that there's an NDA in it at the time you sign it, that you have 21 days where you can go back on that. But of
Mm,
course, that's not really the issue. I mean, it's one issue perhaps,
right.
but the real issue is that as long as NDAs are in play, then there's a money exchange that happens,
Right.
right? And unfortunately for our clients, they are getting less money if they insist on not having an NDA,
Right.
because what people believe that they are buying is they're not seeing that they are actually making reparations for harm done.
Right.
What they're trying to do is to, of course, buy silence.
Right.
And so we have only to look north to Canada,
Mm,
where another one of my strong wishes is for no statute of limitations on these
yes.
cases, right?
Yeah. Explain what that is for my
Yeah.
listeners who don't know what a statute of limitation is.
In the area of sexual assault on state law, every state has its own statute of limitations. So until more recent history, even children were given, like 3 years to try to figure out whether, to bring a claim, which again, Steve, as we know from neuroscientists, it takes a long time for the brain to process what has happened. And particularly, I would say, in the same way that we've given longer statutes of limitations for children, the same argument exists for adults,
Sure.
particularly in the area of cults and religious and spiritual groups. These are
Yep.
trusted people.
Right.
And when they violate that trust, when they betray and the institution betrays you, you need a lot of time. So what happens is if it takes you, I had a client that it took her almost 10 years to figure out that she actually had been raped.
Mm-hmm.
So in the meantime, the statute of limitations is 5 years. And so there is no recourse
Right.
when that's the case. And so we've seen an expansion of the times within which you can file a claim.
Yep.
We've seen an expansion in the child sexual abuse world. We've seen open windows. So that's a new kind of event, so to speak, in the legal world, which is in California and New York. They've said, here's a year, and it happened
Right.
to be from 2022 to 2023, a year in which you can come forward no matter when you were assaulted, if you were 18 or over. Previous to that, they had a 2-year open window to come forward for children.
I remember in New York, they did that with the Jehovah's Witnesses because they had a list of 35,000 pedophiles and they
Yes.
weren't reporting them to the police.
No.
And we were able to get that passed. And so
Yes.
a lot of people came forward
Yes.
and such.
I think that there were a huge number, I think less under the adult open window, but we had a number of cases, a number of clients who came forward, one going back to 1969.
Interesting.
Against the organization because the perpetrator is dead.
Yep. So I want to just add a comment, if I may, about child sexual perpetration. And again, because I've worked with clients for so many years, one thing that perpetrators often say to young children that they're raping is, you're too cute and you made me do this. And a child believed that they made this adult rape them.
Yes.
And they carry that unconsciously in their mind, thinking like they were responsible, therefore that nothing was done against them because it was their fault. And then the other thing that people have told me systematically is that the pedophile would say things like, no one would believe you if you tell anyone, and your family will hate you, and your community will hate you if you do this.
Not limited to children, Steve.
Yeah.
I see it all the time in cults. First of all, it's secret. Right. It's something you can't tell anybody about.
Yeah.
And also I'm doing this for your benefit. I mean, it's very similar, not exactly the same, but I'm doing this because you're special. Yeah. Because you're going to be the next prophet. Yeah. And this is that exchange under the Trafficking Act, right? It's that commercial sex act is, you're going to become the next prophet if you have sex with me. And that confuses people terribly, even as adults.
So, Carol, a lot of the people that I meet don't have the money to hire a lawyer. Yes. Is there a chance they can get assistance if they don't have the money up front?
Well, let me tell you about the the business model of plaintiffs' lawyers who are out there in the litigation trenches. We take cases on a contingency fee basis only. Okay. So that means, there are pros and cons to that in the legal system. It means that people with no money, and believe me, we have clients who've been in cults for 30 years and been laboring for no money for 30 years. Right. So no surprise that they don't have money for a lawyer, right? Right. So we do take cases on a contingency basis. The downside to that, system-wide, Steve, is that only the very, very best cases get taken, right? Because at the end of the day, for a business like a law firm, if we take cases that are not winnable, we can't keep the lights on and take the next case.
Right. Right. I understand the nature of business. I have a business too. Yes. But it also seems to me like if there are very well-to-do law firms, like they could have a pro bono wing doing cases because they can push the law forward. Yes. To expand things, and then they'll sleep better at night if they've made their money on other cases.
Well, and not only that, which is all good reasoning, and I was a partner at Morgan Lewis in Philadelphia, which is a large law firm, and they have, I think the last time I saw, 100% of their lawyers are committed to some pro bono effort or another. I think that the younger lawyers enjoy this kind of work. It's very, very interesting for
Yeah.
lawyers. It's paving new ground, and that we don't always get to do that when we're lawyers in big law firms. We
Yeah.
may be stuck in the back room doing, reviewing discovery documents or something that's not quite as challenging as
Right.
being out there on the front lines. And so, yeah, I think a lot of law firms are doing that, and it reminds me that is a good place to have relationships. And there are some nonprofits who also do this work.
Mm.
But so, yeah, but the law is not equal access.
Right.
We should not pretend that it is, because it's very hard for people.
Right. So we have about 10 minutes or so left. I'd like you to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
because we've had this conversation together, that it's not easy for victims to testify,
Oh,
and a
yeah.
lot of preparation has to be done, and
Mm-hmm.
because it's traumatic
It is.
to have to explain what happened and to be grilled in a cross-examination. Talk about prep and
Yes.
and that's dimension, please.
Well, there's no question about that. What you're saying is absolutely true. And when people come to us, we do try to be realistic with people about what the litigation process requires,
Yeah.
because people who have been harmed in this way are being triggered. They have PTSD. They have all kinds of obstacles that they're
Right.
trying to overcome. For some people, it is really too soon, maybe. This is another
Mm-hmm.
reason why the statutes of limitations need to be longer, because
Right.
people need to not only process what happened to them, but they need to be able to get stronger, as they continue to process and have
Right.
therapy and get help. Um, but some people, and it does all depend on the person and the circumstances. Um, we just settled a case with a client who said this was really the beginning of my healing journey.
Mm.
So there is something, not for everyone. I'm not trying to sugarcoat what the litigation
Right.
process is, but I think there is something when people who have been silenced, had their
Right.
voices taken away,
Right.
have people that are called lawyers who
Mm-hmm.
listen to them, who believe them,
Right.
and who begin telling their story through the legal process until they are able to get their own voice and
Mm-hmm.
tell their story. That's the ideal.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
It's not always that way, because people are deposed. They have to sit in a room, and what we see cross-examination in a trial, but even before that, people are going to be deposed, and somebody's going to be saying them, but why didn't you scream?
Right.
Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And it's hard for people to feel that they are being challenged like that, even in that kind of very black box kind of environment where it's just lawyers trying to, create a record.
Right. And my efforts is to try to explain the dual identity, that you had a cult identity where
Yes,
you were not allowed to think negative thoughts or
yes,
express anything negative against the leader, the doctrine, or the policy.
yes.
So you didn't have access to those resources that you really could have had or should have had if your mind hadn't been hacked.
That's right. And we use your bite model
Mm.
when we take clients in. We give them that because we want them to identify. I mean, they haven't thought about these things through that particular lens
Right.
of coercion. And when they go through and they see on how many levels
Right.
that they were coerced, I think it helps to relieve part of that you mentioned before, which is this was my fault.
Right. Well, and that's a feature of a mind control cult, is that the standard is everything good is because of the
Right.
leader, the
Yes.
doctrine, and the policy. Anything that's a problem is your fault.
That's right.
You weren't committed enough. You didn't fast enough. You didn't pray hard enough. You didn't work hard enough, or whatever. So when people come out, they have to get over this
Yeah.
programming that
Yes.
that you're the center of all things negative.
Right.
Build a perspective, remember who you were before, understand how it applies in other cult contexts, because people can always see it more easily at first in another group. That's why these documentaries about other
Oh,
cults are
yes.
so helpful,
Yes, they
because
are.
people are watching something on Scientology, they're like, that happened in my Buddhist cult, or they're watching something on Ranieri and they're like,
Yes,
that happened in my Christian group.
that's exactly
That's
right. That's exactly right.
so perspective.
And it part of what I think people have to be able to recognize is how they were gaslit is I think the word that
Mm,
people use. I see it all the time now.
mm,
It's taking an ideology and using it what I think of as absolute world. Like a woman who came forward and called out the leader of this group had
mm.
another, a holy person, a swami, a guru, whatever it was, who said, no, but you're just going for revenge. I can't believe that you haven't learned the lesson. Let it go. All things be peace. And I'm like, how do we, Steve, get people to recognize that
Yeah,
that's a manipulation?
yeah, absolutely. It's really going to take people, I think, religious people who
Yeah.
are, grounded in love and truth, conscience, don't do to others what you don't want done to you, to amplify their voice and
Mm-hmm.
speak out against the people who
Mm-hmm.
are abusing the role of religion, using it to lie, to make people angry, to do violence, to do insurrections against the U.S. government and
Yeah.
such. Um, but I mean, the reality is that um, change is happening a lot, and we're either going to be proactive
Mm-hmm.
and make goals that are going to be life sustaining for
Mm-hmm.
planet Earth,
Mm,
to live together
mm-hmm.
as communities of people with different beliefs and practices and cultures, or we're going to go down into
Mm,
the world of chaos,
mm-hmm.
which is exactly what authoritarian dictators and cults want, because
Exactly,
they
because that
want
gives them
people.
right, that gives them the environment they need.
Yeah. And then their
Mm-hmm.
freedom of information gets taken away,
Mm-hmm.
and everything gets like Nazi Germany did for a while.
Yeah.
A lot of the people left Germany when they saw what was coming. But are we going to learn from history? Are we going to get ahead of the technologies that are being foisted on us, that are systematically taking away our privacy, our data? Like, we need data protection in the
Yes.
United States. It's an absolute absurdity that we're so far behind Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's
In a lot of
absurd.
different ways. Yes.
And I personally would like to see CEOs of major social media platforms held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, like
Mm-hmm.
this guy who was with Telegram, got
Mm-hmm.
arrested in
Yes.
France because he's allowing rapes and
Yeah.
tortures and all kinds of illegal terrorist stuff going on in Telegram. I think this is common sense, actually.
And what I want, Steve, is I want the same thing in the, in this world that I am in, which is, as you said, that religious leaders who are standing for the best parts of their religious doctrine
Yeah,
would stand up and police themselves
yeah,
so that the law, which is an imperfect system to begin with, would not have to do it for them.
yep,
There
agreed.
is no accountability. There is no accountability in Buddhism.
Mm.
There is no accountability in yoga. There's no accountability in any of these high control groups.
Yeah, the only accountability are good practitioners who say this is a violation of ethics and such.
Yep.
So, last words, Carol Murchison. Thank you for your good work.
You are very welcome. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation.
Yep, let's update the law for undue
do
influence and help.
Well, you've given me some
folks.
ideas sitting right here, Steve.
Great.
So I'm going after it.
Good. Let's do some journal articles, I think, using case examples. I have one last thing I'll put on your plate. So, because we talked about NXIVM and you're familiar with it. So, India Oxenberg was in DOS where she was mutilated with a brand. And they hired, they meaning the Bronfmans and Raniere, hired Park Dietz, one of the top forensic psychiatrists, to evaluate India Oxenberg. And he said, she's not brainwashed. She's perfectly fine. And I was on a Zoom with India a few months ago, and I said, hey, India, this thing with Park Dietz, what's up with it now that you're out? She said, they trained me to lie.
Yes.
They totally manipulated the entire situation. And I said, hey, India, I have this desire to create a model forensic evaluation for experts to evaluate a current cult member who's still indoctrinated to protect the leader and say all the things they're coached to say. What do you think? She said, I'd love to be part of that. I said, wonderful, because we can use your story as a case exemplar of how they gamed the system. And then we can start outlining the kinds of things like interviewing family members and friends, like interviewing former members and experts on coercive control and mind control groups, and asking questions that go out of the box of a normal psychiatric evaluation that challenges the person to have to demonstrate that they're able to think.
Yes.
So that's another project I'd like you to think about, because I want to help.
Right.
I need a lot of great legal minds to help me on this, and I want to publish a law journal article or public health or psychology journal article saying, we can't just ask people, are you thinking for yourself? Are you happy? Can you leave whenever you want to? Okay, clean bill of health.
Yes.
That's not a forensic evaluation of a mind control cult member.
No. That goes back, Steve, in my mind to what we were talking about before, which is kind of like the old phrase, it takes a village. It takes the lawyers, it takes the forensic psychologists, it takes the media, because we all know India Oxenberg, and we know, that whatever forensic psychologist was doing that didn't have a clue about the cult and the coercion and the manipulation. I mean, we know these things now. Now we just need for our systems to catch up to it.
Yep. And I'll just quote my mentor, Thomas Gutile, at the program in psychiatry and the law. And a comment that India made to me is like, there should be a distinction of who's paying the expert witness to do the evaluation, because it may be a conflict of interest for the expert witness to be hired by the cult to give a clean bill of health. My mentor is like, an expert is not committed to giving the lawyer what they want to hear. They have to answer truthfully of what they find in the evaluation. And so looking at who's paying is really important.
Follow the money.
Follow the money.
It's always a trail to look for what is happening, and absolutely in the law it is.
Yes, Carol Murchison, attorney, defender of women who've been violated, and continued success. And I look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you again at another
Yes,
conference soon.
Let's continue the conversation, Steve. Thank
Great.
you.
Steve Hassan here. You know, it's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.